Welcome, everyone, to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we've got a really interesting conversation, and you're going to look at Gary Yorke, our guest, as a superhero. And not only because you're a huge Spider-Man fan, Laker fan, but what you've been able to accomplish as the executive director of customer experience of the city of Toronto is pretty amazing. Not only have you put together all kinds of systems and programs, but you brought together 69 different entities. I mean, in the private sector and the different departments and internal politics that we've got to play in order to create a cohesive customer success, customer experience strategy is nowhere near what you've had to deal with. And I do say politics because you're in the public sector, so that's a big part of the job. But what I'd love to do before we get into this is maybe expand a little bit more on your background in your public and private sector experience, and then we'll dive right in.
Steve, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity and just the ability to share my experience and insights in this platform. I think it's really, really awesome. So I really thank you for that. In terms of myself, I bring over 25, 30 plus years of experience in customer experience and the user experience journey. My backgrounds are contact center technology, people, processes, and policy. I've had many years of experience within Bell Canada, 10 plus years there, in which I managed contact centers from their interior government, Fortune 500 companies, so on and so forth, and also managed service accounts for Fortune 500 organizations as well. After that, I moved over to Toronto Community Housing, in which I looked at facilities management, and most importantly, their contact center there as well. And then in my most recent experience is with the city of Toronto for the last probably 9 plus years, where I've managed a 3-1 organization and evolved that organization to the first customer experience division within the city of Toronto or in the municipal space within North America to begin with. We're the first one of its kind in Canada. So I'm very proud of that in terms of developing that organization. But the reason we were able to do that is because of the incredible work that we were able to do as a team to really raise the profile and the public trust and confidence that 3-1 as an organization has brought, not just for the city of Toronto in terms of its stakeholders, but the residents, businesses, and visitors that come to Toronto on a daily basis. With the information that we provide, and I know that what we talked about before, what's the value add proposition that we bring? Well, it's about passion, commitment to serve, and most importantly, data and transparency. So from that perspective, I kind of see myself as the human 3M. I don't necessarily make a product, but I'm here to make it better. And in my experiences in the private sector and public sector, I've always had the opportunity and the blessings to make something better, world-class. And my hope, my dream, my vision was always to be a world-class organization within the city of Toronto, and also a world-class organization with anywhere that I move on to and grow within that organization as well. I believe in being the best of class, but that starts with being the best person, the best leader, and the best culture in the organization to lead change.
So many things in there that I want to unpack, but at the beginning, you talked about basically the mission of building the trust and confidence in the city of Toronto. And one of the biggest things that's happening these days is that trust across the board, public sector, private sector, all aspects of our life is on a nosedive. In fact, I was just reading a recent study that talked about how the evidence, the customer, or on the public sector side, the user or the citizen, their confidence in us and how we share evidence that they should trust us, 74% of those people do not believe the evidence that we share that basically is there to bolster and build the trust. So that's huge. You've got that going against you, which we all do, but these 69 different entities, if you could explain kind of the web of intertwined entities that you had to bring together in order to deliver a customer experience that could be trusted by the public sector. I'd love to start out there.
Not an easy answer, but excellent question. In terms of the entities, you have the mayor's office. Then you have 24 counselors, and you have 44 divisions that you have to manage through. Then you have members of the public. And then also you have your staff, colleagues, and what have you. And all of them have to have some semblance of trust and confidence really to be honest, to be consistent, and to really utilize data, not your opinion, but facts. Right. So one of the things that we have to do as an organization is to have credibility. So the first thing we want to do is credibility comes with performance. Predictability creates that trust and confidence. So if we're not predictable in terms of developing and actually being consistent with how we arise to that service level and really embrace that service level ethos from a day-to-day, month-to-month, week-to-week perspective, then not many people can trust us. So the first thing we did was allow everyone to understand what our service levels were and to make sure that we're putting models in place to achieve them and address any issues that actually hindered us. So many years ago, I was first starting at 311, and I started in November. And there were several years in which that organization did not hit service level. By December, we were hitting service level. And it wasn't because of the influx of money. It's about process and understanding the science that comes along with it and the due diligence that's required. And really some managing. You really have to be very diligent on understanding where people are, what they're doing, how long they're on the phone, so on and so forth, and if you have the correct information. So in terms of trust and building that trust with the stakeholders, first of all, is you're meeting consistently at service level. So we're able to meet that service level, which has not been done in the city for a prolonged period of time. The second thing is really at the end of the day, we're the frontline representation of that city of Toronto. So when I was in that position and the responsibility about making sure that we're the front line, managing the narrative, and in some cases, a council would look at their ward, their perspective from a particular lens. Within 301, we don't have that privilege. We have to manage the city's brand and everyone that comes along with it, those 24 different wards, not the one ward, 24 different wards. And there's all nuances and what have you. And sometimes the squeaky wheel wins, and that's not fair. That's not transparent in our particular environment. There's also privacy concerns that we have to take into account, which councillors are not privy to. So there's information that we receive that we cannot share without the residents' consent. And ensuring that we actually communicate that upfront with the resident is really important in terms of building trust. And in terms of also building trust, it's about that upfront messaging around respect. It comes both ways. We're definitely here to provide you with the best level of service that we can, but as a resident, as a person who's engaging with the city of Toronto, we also expect certain behaviors from yourself. And if we can meet ourselves in that common baseline, then we can communicate, share perspectives and data in a very timely, respectful, professional manner. Also, just in terms of a business plan and being transparent about what our business plan is, what it consists of, what are the KPIs that generate successes, and making sure that when we meet with councillors and when we meet with committees and so forth, we're very transparent with them in regards to how we're performing. And if we're not performing, it's not putting it under the rug. It's about taking accountability and showing the actions that's required to make sure we address those issues or anomalies.
So you slipped something in there really cool and calm at the beginning. You said building trust is about establishing a benchmark on performance and then hitting that performance, and that you weren't hitting the performance, but within 6 months that you were. And it wasn't about throwing more money at the problem, which is what we love to do. When there's a problem, obviously we need to bring more resources. We need to do more things, but without expanding budget, without garnering additional funds, how did you go from underperformance in terms of customer support for the city to meeting those expectations?
I think that's a fantastic point. And it's all about leadership. It's about empowering your staff, understanding, for example, and I'll use that statement from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So in regards to our staff, we have the ability to really enhance someone's day or ruin it based upon the information and the lack of timeliness in how we react to them. So it's about training, it's about access to data, it's about empowering our staff, not yelling at our staff. It's about understanding the importance of one person who's doing their job, doing to the best that they can, and the positive impacts that come along with that. It's about sharing the positive stories. Even though we're there to talk about assets, potholes, so on and so forth, we actually have saved lives through the situation. People have tried, unfortunately, suicide, so on and so forth. But we've been able to get people to those locations in a very timely fashion to address those issues before they hurt themselves. So there are many things that the CSR actually is empowered to do, that our management team, our supervisors, our managers, our directors are empowered to do and take responsibility. It's not a me conversation, it's a we conversation. Enhancing that culture around that shared responsibility, around what comes with authority and power, there comes a lot of pride. So I think the biggest thing that we could do is look at culture and how we empower our staff, provide them with the right tools, with the right support. More importantly, we're not here to blame. We're here to help them. And if there's some challenges, we're also here to coach. For example, when there was some stress, we brought in CAMH to address some of those issues as well and empower our staff with the right tools to deal with not the stress that comes along on the phone, but in their lives. Because in many cases, we talk about balance, but in many cases, we take our work issues home. And in this hybrid environment, our work is home. So all that trickles down into those environments. And if we don't provide our staff with the proper tools to address those things, the business is going to suffer. So we're human beings together in the long line.
You keep saying so much that I could do a whole podcast just on going deeper. So my takeaway from what you said there is empowerment. And there's been plenty of studies that talked about the lack of trust between a contact center management and the representatives or the agents themselves in order to do the right things. Don't go off the script. And what you're saying is, no, there's situations where we'll have to intuitively know what you need to do and be able to address this unique situation, the context that's around it. So empowering is one takeaway, but then that empowerment, you had their backs. You were supporting them. They knew that this wasn't a plain blame game, that this was a let's make the decisions and hopefully they're the right ones, but let's move forward. Let's learn if they aren't. You're not going to get in trouble for doing something proactive, being creative in your job and addressing the needs of the public. Is that a good takeaway from what you were saying?
I think it's perfect. I think we have to be humanistic about it. They're not robots that have to follow a script from A to Z. We need people that can think on their feet, ad lib, and support them when they've made a mistake or what have you. And we pivot. I would like to say that saying about be like water and find the right path. Nothing is linear in this world. And we have to be able to adjust as leaders to accept that and support our staff through those particular journeys.
There's a notion that was on an episode that I did recently called psychological safety. Having the safety to know that I'm empowered to make the right decision. If it's not the right decision, I'm not getting in trouble for it. I'm probably going to be given a pat on the back that you tried everything that you could. You tried to make the right decision. Let's learn from this. That psychological safety opens up the floodgates for us to do things that we haven't done before. And it sounds like you were kind of in the non-performance era, and then 6 months later, it was the script, it was tight control, it was here's how we manage customer support, and then the empowerment, the leverage, the opportunity, the psychological safety that you put into place. Is that a good articulation there? Or what else is the difference that made that transition? Because everything you talked about didn't take extra money.
Well, exactly. It takes leadership. It takes passion. It takes a focus on your staff. I think you nailed it on the head in terms of psychological safety. That was an agenda that's been in our business plan from day one, creating let's chat sessions, open door policies, town halls, where it's always about the voice. I think it's very important for our staff to use their voice. And as long as they use it with respect, and there could be some frustrations there, but we don't want to get it past a certain line because we're still in the place of business. But having said that, if there's something that you're not comfortable with, you have concerns or questions, use your voice. It's not a problem. Let's hear about it. Let's talk about it and figure it out. I could be wrong 100%. I'm never always right. So it's an issue getting perspective, pivoting, and doing what's right for our team because we're here as a team. And it's funny when we talk about our team, one of those parameters about success as a team, we have Toronto Public Service Week and it's a celebration of public services, what have you. And we have something called the Tournament of Champions within the city of Toronto. And that's something in which we have certain tasks that each division has to do. Take pictures of executives, communicate, so on and so forth. Basically, it's healthy competition amongst divisions. And we said there are 44 of them. And for the 9 years that I was at the city of Toronto, the least in terms of ranking that we were was number 3. In many cases, we were number 1 or number 2. And a smaller division, because some divisions are thousands of people, we're up to about 300 people that are in our division. We're still number 1 in the city of Toronto in terms of beating the Tournament of Champions. And that's because about pride. It's about cohesiveness. It's about our brand. It's about confidence. It's about trust. And then talking about trust in terms of the public, you look at CSAT's informations and so forth. So I remember looking at the information we had prior to, I would say we're at 85%. And I know the Toronto Star questioned that. They weren't confident of that number. And I said, I'm very confident of that number. And they said, they're going to do their own poll. And respectfully, after they did their own poll, they came back and said, we have 85%. And I said, awesome, because I really felt that that was the right number. We do, in fact, and then interesting enough, once we've, digitized the services and transformed the services, we're now in the low to mid 90s in terms of customer satisfaction. So in terms of trust and confidence, those are pretty good indicators that we're in the right street. Now, are there areas that we can improve? Absolutely. But I do believe that as an organization, as a front end brand of the city of Toronto, that 3-in-1 entity and the customer experience division really has done a very, very good job of building that trust and really transforming from an inside out kind of ethos to the outside in, and really understanding what the resident needs, what the visitor needs, what the business needs versus what our divisions want to dictate to them.
Did you talk about the needs of these individual groups? In the private sector, there's something known as customer obsession. Right? Amazon's probably like the biggest example of that, just completely customer obsessed organizations. Does that have a role in what we're talking about here in your CSAT scores and the satisfaction levels and the achievements that you've made? Customer obsession in the public sector?
You asked some really, really good questions. And I would say that the difference between the private sector and the public sector is that obsession is actually mandated as part of a cultural commitment in the private sector. We're actually judged, paid by those KPIs that really drive those customer experience initiatives. In the city, it's still a little bit 44 different organizations, different interpretations of the customer, and that negotiation of that is still evolving. So I think that some areas are more obsessed than others, but it will take some time for that to become a social norm or a cultural norm within the city of Toronto.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a right turn here, but we've talked a lot about public versus private. It's obvious that on the onset, the very different scenarios and situations and context. What are the things from the public sector that you've learned that you think transition well over into the private sector, lessons that we can learn?
A great question. I think in the last 3 to 5 years, the public sector has really focused more on engagement and truly listening to the voice of the customer in a different way. Not because of products and solutions, but I think because of COVID and things that we've actually had to manage through COVID. We talked about psychological safety before, but there's a lot of wellness challenges that come along within the organization, and one has to adapt to that. And I think the private sector needs some work in that area. And I think the public sector is actually leading that charge because the difference between I see the public and private sector is the private sector, you have to earn your customers' trust. You really have to do marketing, so on and so forth. There's so many alternatives out there. In the public sector, your roads are your roads. There's no other people that are going to do it to the municipal space. Your garbage are your garbage. Your water is your water. So you're a captive audience. So the other way that you gain proper service is about access to information and data, being transparent. We talked about our staff having their voice, letting the residents have their voice and demonstrate the changes that they've done. And in some cases, the mayor's office has done that as well in terms of bringing through the budgetary process, so on and so forth. I see that the city of Toronto and other municipalities are really empowering the public. Now, adapting those to actual policies and so forth, that takes a bit of time. But I do think the public sector is doing a very good job of creating forums in which that voice is being heard and people feel that they matter.
You did a lot of work actually, didn't you, in terms of CRM systems and forms, basically giving the public the ability to have their voice heard and actually not heard from 44 or 69 different entities, but heard as one voice. Can you explain a little bit more about what you did there?
Absolutely. For example, with the CRM in the client relationship management tool, what we wanted to do was in many cases, there was an evolution of the city in terms of how we provided service to the public. So we went from a multi-channel perspective where it did have phone and would have encounters, but they were never integrated. So you'd have to repeat or have a different experience depending on the channels of choice. Now we've moved that to an omni-channel environment where there's seamless integration. And the good thing about it is, in terms of service requests, for instance, there's 600 types of service requests that now could be generated online through your phone, through your email, so on and so forth. So you can actually communicate, initiate that particular service request without calling an agent, getting status on your choice. So if you want to get emails, if you want to get calls, so on and so forth. And then on top of that, you can actually put a survey function now. So we know, and that's how we know about the 95%. And after each interaction, you can choose if you want to provide surveys or not, or respond to that survey through the channel of choice. So we now have a survey functionality that's been developed by our team. We have the online omni-channel environment that's been developed by our team and the world-class solution. Not only do we have that, but complaints and compliments. So what we've been able to do in a phased approach through the customer experience division and what have you, we want to create capabilities across the city of Toronto. In the past, we talked about that siloed approach where everyone feels or felt that they own the customer. Someone owned the toes, someone owned the feet, someone owned the nose, so on and so forth. And our division was to say, no, we don't own the customer. The city manager owns the customer, council, and the mayor owns the customer. We're here to provide transparent service to that customer. So in regards to better service through the technology and processes, we have that CRM. Now we have the survey functionalities. Now we have complaints and compliments, making it easier instead of having 49 different ways of issuing a complaint through city language, which we may or may not know. It's simple information, simple ways of doing it through the omni-channel environment in which you create that complaint or compliment. And 5% happens to be compliments, 95% happen to be complaints on certain areas. You can escalate, you're informed. That division is now held accountable for responding in a timely fashion. So there's transparency and accountability, which in turn builds trust for the public as well.
Yeah, just the idea that I have easy access to the city or to the departments, that hopefully if I have appraised, that would be great. But if I have questions, it's easy to get a hold of somebody in the way that I want to. Right there, my level of satisfaction would go up versus the frustration of who do I even talk to? And is it even going to matter? The fact that you can lodge complaint or a ticket and that you would actually be acknowledged for it and asked, how do you want to be responded? You've already well exceeded my expectations, right?
Absolutely. And reduce escalations because there's a transparency and accountability that comes with this particular initiative. So we've been able to show value of that alone. There's always been initial resistance because you're worried about everyone's going to flood the gates. And it's like, no, those are already being used. We just weren't responding in a proficient or professional manner. Now we are.
So I'm curious because you talked in our previous conversations about putting together scorecards so you could keep track of all these initiatives and your performance and everything, not just at the overall CSAT level, but with 44 different internal departments. How do you create a one scorecard that everybody's going to agree on, that you're going to judge? And you talked about departments are held accountable for response times and things like that. How do you do that kind of a process? Because we have a problem doing that internally within the private sector.
Part of the challenge is we're now in the climate of accountability, transparency, and with service, data matters. So we've talked about the 600 service request types that have been now digitized. So what we've been able to do now is create a scorecard that's available to counselors at this point in time through my time at the city to basically create a scorecard that shows the service catalog. So 600 types of service requests, the service level that we're supposed to attain to in terms of 4 hours, 24 hours, so on and so forth, how we're actually delivering against that service level, and the ward trends that are happening in Ward 1 versus 12, so on and so forth. So you compare wards as well in service requests. So now our colleagues in terms of other divisions that are integrated with 311, such as Toronto Water, MLS, Revenue Services, so on and so forth, they get information that enhances their ability to manage their business. The city manager now has an understanding of these 600 types and what the trends and nuances across the city, and so do the counselors. And the next eventual step would be to make that accessible to the public.
I imagine that that information is accessible internally, so that you don't want to be the laggard. You don't want to be the department that is pulling the city down, that has view by the mayor, view by the city manager, view by the other departments. Did that play a factor in raising the rising tide that lifts all boats?
I think that plays a factor in a positive way and a negative way. Everyone's always afraid of data in some way, shape, or form because it can be misrepresented. Now, through a proper governance structure in which we communicate to the councilors through that's called the service committee, that have to go to that particular committee. They ask questions around that service request, so on and so forth. So divisions have to communicate what the trends and nuances are, show the actions or project plans or product plans, if required, to provide consistency of delivery of that service. And if not, we have to say as to why and then what the challenges are. And then you have to be accountable. So from that perspective, having a fair governance model kind of lessens some of the stress or concern and really talks about, we know we're not perfect, but we're moving from good to great. And when we look at that data from an end-to-end perspective, the numbers are actually pretty good to begin with. And many of the divisions are, I would say, either in the high 70s or low 80s. So overall, they're delivering really good service. Now, are there ways for improvement? Of course. And we're going to ask the public, because it's public money, to also tell us which of those areas are more important to them.
I love that. That's feedback. That's the involvement of the customer, the public in the process. We've talked about so much. My next question is about what haven't we talked about in terms of public versus private sector? You've played both roles that we can be taken away and learning here. What haven't we covered yet that you think is important for us to be talking about?
Well, I think in order for the public sector to evolve, it needs to have a little more trust in private sector entities such as vendors and so forth. Some vendors have the skill sets to really transform organizations, businesses, and experiences. And I think moving forward, if we're really going to actually evolve the way we want to for the resident and for the public, we actually have to have strategic partners with these particular vendors that would help us accelerate that evolution and transformation in a very reasonable state. So I think that partnership, instead of this divide that we have, public versus private, we should actually have intersections. And I really believe that there's some best practices and some skill sets and very smart individuals and business models that would help accelerate the city and other municipalities as well.
That makes good sense. The private sector is innovating all the time. They're rewarded for their innovation. So that partnership just makes good sense. So now I'm curious, all that you've accomplished here, what are you the most proud of that you've been able to do?
There are a couple of things. The first thing I would say is the evolution of the 3-in-1 organization to be number one in Canada, to transform with the CRM and create that Omni-Channel environment, a positive culture, which we talked about with the TPS and the Challenge of Champions and things. I think we underestimate the importance of culture and leadership. So I think that is one of the things I'm extremely proud of, is that transformational journey. The other thing I'm proud of, to be very honest with you, is the ability to win the City Manager's Customer Service Awards twice. That's pretty significant in that sense. And that represents the evolution of work that we've done within the 3-in-1 organization, but also to build that first customer experience division within Canada, and that pride that comes along with that, designing it from start, understanding the nuances, understanding the importance of design and strategy, the importance of delivery, the importance of data, and importance of operationalization of those particular theories or outcomes, and use a fact-based mechanism to drive effectiveness versus ROI. So those are the things that I'm very, very proud of as a leader in regards to with my time at the City of Toronto. I'm looking forward to applying those learnings into another opportunity.
What's interesting is I hear you talk a lot about fact base and surveying and putting the public in charge. And on the other hand, I hear you talking at the very beginning about how important it was to basically establish that psychological safety and empower people. And that you brought up the first thing you said about what you were most proud of was culture that you've created in the leadership team. And I keep coming back to both those are things that don't cost money, that make huge difference. In fact, from the private sector side, I've talked to 2 CRO, CMO, Chief Marketing Officer combinations on a podcast episode where they said 50% of the success of their organization, they attributed to company culture because it attracted the right people. It gave the right people the means to perform, and they retained the right people. And the right employees turned into, whether it's private or public, great experiences for the public. So those are my takeaways from our entire conversation. But I'd love to ask you the one last question is, if you were going to design a takeaway that you wanted all of us to have, one thing that we were going to take away from this conversation, what would that be?
It's funny you asked that. I think when in all leadership positions, I kind of equate the business to a meal and being a chef. The takeaway that I see is that we have ingredients. The ingredients could be their staff or stakeholders, so on and so forth, the products that we have to build and design. We have our measurements, which are things that drive outcomes and outputs. But really, the thing that makes a successful cook, chef, entrepreneur, business person is something that's underestimated and underlooked in many cases. When you taste a great meal, because it's made out of love, and that chef brings love to the table. And sometimes we look at people and we look at their resumes and their inputs, and they've done A, B, C, D, and E. But that intrinsic thing, that EQ, that quality of that leadership, how they actually drive things, are underestimated. So the one thing I would say is understand when that person is in front of you, beside you, climbing that mountain with you, how much love does that person bring to the table? How much love and sincerity and integrity does that person bring to their staff, to their commitment to the organization, to their commitment to the customer that they're serving? I always believe in service leadership and what have you, and being that servant and that public servant. So I really challenge someone to look at that love. And then when I equate it to myself, I love the challenges, and I see myself as that iron chef in that particular organization where they bring you these mystery goods and you have to make this wonderful meal out of it. Well, I'm saying bring me those goods, because of the skill sets and the experience and the passion and love that I have, I'm confident that we're going to build something together that's world-class in an organization. But it starts with people, with love of people, with integrity of people, and motivating and having that common vision and having that trust, not just with the public, with the people that you serve internally within your organization as well.
Well, I'm certainly not going to share this episode with my wife because she would not say that I make dinners with love. Gary, I would love to continue on. I know there's all kinds of conversations and questions that are going to happen as a result of this. Would it be appropriate if we gave out a link to, say, your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out to you with those questions?
Absolutely, it'd be my pleasure. It'd be my pleasure.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for coming on and sharing and amazing accomplishments that you've created in your career and the successes. And I love that you attribute that to the team and to the culture, and that's a team effort. But as a leader, you've got to create that psychological safety for them to do that. And so I just want to say thank you for coming on and sharing. We've all learned so much as a result.
Thank you very much. And my Spider-Man friend thanks you as well. Much appreciated.